Hello and welcome to BIM XT Network. My name is Dana Filippi, coming to you from my home office in Washington, DC. For those of you who do not know me, I am a BIM technologist at SmithGroup, an advisor for the Revit DC user group, and speaker for the National BIM conferences. 5 user groups have come together and brought to you the BIM XT Network. The network is run by a board of advisors to help guide our meetings. Our hope is to provide a live forum for people to share and connect on processes and tools related to building modeling. Today's topic is model building and comparison. First, we will hear from Tim Conroy on his experience, followed by a panel of industry experts on how teams are utilizing laser scanning and reality capture technology. We will also discuss where our panelists see this technology taking the industry in the future. After the presentation and panel discussion, we will have a 10-minute follow-up where we'd like to hear from you about your experiences. We will wrap up the call about 2 p.m. today, Eastern Standard Time, that is. A common response from our survey discussion is that one of the best things about this meeting is hearing from you guys, having all of our members participate in the meeting. So please make sure you have your chat up, share with us so that we can all have you as part of the conversation. As you've noticed, you are all muted on the call today. We have Nick Sipes from Baltimore, Maryland, monitoring the chat, and he will be aggregating the questions from the audience. You will have the option to be unmuted and ask the question yourself, or have me ask the question for you. When your question is asked, please let us know where you're calling from today. We plan to do one of these once a month for the remainder of the year. The in-person city-based user groups will start up again eventually. This event is intended to be in addition to those groups. We hope to see you at our live user groups again eventually. You are the audience and the participant, so please turn on your video, play with some virtual backgrounds, and say hello to those you know. Thank you for being a part of the conversation on how laser scanning and reality capture are changing the way our industry works, from early design to facility management. So as I mentioned, first today, we have Tim Conroy. Tim leads the field technology group with DPR, and he is joined today with Raffi Holzer, CEO at Avvir. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, doing well.
Have you guys been spending your time quarantined inside?
For the most part.
Been doing anything fun in your personal time?
Been getting more reading done. So that's...
Any good books we should know about?
Any good books you should know about? I've actually been brushing up on some presidential biographies. So if anybody's into Ulysses Grant, read a great biography by the same guy that wrote that book on Hamilton. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I actually just listened to the audiobook of Una Out of Order, and it was really, really good. It's more of a sci-fi type of book though.
Cool.
How about you? Tim, how's it going?
Good, good. Yeah, I've been off and on site quite a bit. Seeing as my, in my role, it's field focused. I've probably been back on site almost full time for almost 2 months now. Today, I'm not on site because of this event. I wanted to have a nice non-distracting background as much as possible, so I decided to work from home today. But for the most part, my job does require me on site to be beneficial, so I haven't had quite as much work from home time.
You probably make it possible for a lot of us to work remotely, so thank you for that.
Yeah, we can say that. I'm cool with that.
So I know Tim has some slides if you want to pull that up, and I'll stop sharing here. While he does that, maybe we could go ahead and ask everybody where you're calling from. So while we get that transition going, of course, we have our Eastern Seaboard pretty heavily represented here, which is awesome. Give another few seconds here. Other state not listed and outside of USA. I love these. Please share in the chat where you're from if it is not listed or you're outside of USA. So share the results there. Very, very cool. 10% out of state listed and 3% 2 users outside of the USA. That's awesome. So thank you guys for joining us. And once again, thank you for being part of the conversation. We'll jump right over to Tim.
Cool. Just before I get started, can someone confirm that they're seeing the presentation and not presenter mode?
Yes, I can confirm.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. So today, I wanted to take a few moments just to talk through how at DPR we're squeezing more value out of coordination by leveraging artificial intelligence. I know the title's a little on the wordy side, so I wanted to just go through and kind of break it down into pieces. So starting out with how we do things today, the goal is to do more with less. How do we increase the amount of data we're capturing while not overwhelming the user or the audience with this tidal wave of ones and zeros? So to take a look through what I would just say, you know, at a pretty high level, what is standard today is we get issued a set of construction documents. We'll go through, develop our model. We'll do some 3D coordination, some spatial coordination. We sign off, and then we install and turn over. There's a little bit of a gap between the sign off and installation and turnover. So my question to just ponder as I go through this is, are we leaving any value on the table by not leveraging the model in the field as much as maybe we could? So to get into that, my question, again, rhetorical, just have you ever been asked by a client, how do you know you're building per the model? And also, how do you guarantee that your as-built that you're turning over at the end of the job is accurate? Hopefully at the end of this conversation, you'll have a little better sense of how to answer those questions. If it's nothing new, then I apologize now. Hopefully there is at least a nugget for everybody in this next few minutes of conversation. So how do we connect the dots? So you notice there's a couple dots in there that don't have any descriptions on them. And so let's kind of go through those. So between the sign-off and installation, we started fairly recently doing, you know, layout drawings, prefab, spool sheets, trying to leverage that model a little past sign-off. Next, we had model-based layout. So now how do we take the model elements that we spend so much time and money coordinating out into the field with us and install it per the model? So that gets us to installation, but it doesn't guarantee our as-built accuracy. And that's where reality capture starts to come in. So we started adding reality capture with laser scanning, photogrammetry, progress photos, etc. We also then started to look at, well, how do we leverage these point clouds, this data set, to validate the installation, and then ultimately to update our as-built models, to then give a better product at turnover, not just a red line set where someone at the end of the job sits down with their favorite red color pencil or marker, and they just start doodling on what they think happened in the field. Even if it's happening real time, it's still your best guess at what you feel is being installed, not necessarily exactly what is. So far, probably nothing groundbreaking, maybe not quite mainstream yet, but there's probably no one on the call that hasn't heard these things. So what if I said there was more? So going past turnover, you know, if we have a really good as-built model, our design teams, our owners, can start leveraging that information to make better design improvements, to document lessons learned, and ultimately to allow us construction guys to influence design. So at this point, you may be asking, how do we align the virtual world with the real world? A lot of people will say it's through best fit. You take the modeled elements and you align it to something that's out in the field, maybe walls or steel. But the question that comes from that is, what about construction tolerances? Everything in construction has a tolerance. Nothing is installed perfectly to what it was meant to be. So how do we deal with construction tolerances? The answer, if you ask me, is control. The hierarchy of control, going from primary through secondary to tertiary, also known as building control, that allows us to make sure that we're building off of one network or a system of interconnected networks to then everything gets verified. So we build to one network and we verify to that same network. Without that single network, how can we say one contractor is wrong or another one is right? Could they both potentially be right or potentially both be wrong? So let's talk about how DPR does this. More specifically, how we leverage laser scanning with AI to get better and deeper insights into what we're actually building, not just what we think we're building. So this gets into the meat of the presentation of capture and validation. To me, it's more than just a hollow commitment to say that, yeah, we are building what we built, what we intended on building. You know, early in my career, I had a client come up to me and ask, you know, we're walking in the field and he asked, well, how do you know that what you coordinated is being installed? And unfortunately, the best answer I could come up with, you know, fresh out of college is, you know, I spent enough time in the model. I start to recognize things when they're off in the field. And if we can get enough eyes on the model, then we have more people, more chances of picking up on things if they get installed incorrectly. The hard part is, as soon as one system gets installed incorrectly or in the wrong spot, it very quickly can become this rapid who can get there first. And it's back to the old ways of doing construction, is the first one in wins. That person gets all the space. So we got to really be careful of how we answer that question to not fall into the same pitfalls as we have in the past. So defining the scope, like I said, we spend an exorbitant amount of time and money designing these buildings, creating models, coordinating to make sure everything fits, trying to keep sequence in mind, constructability in mind. But then we almost lose the model after we sign off. We create spool drawings, we create layout drawings, but we don't really take the model with us. So why don't we put it to work more, and how do we get there? So the easiest way to get to where you're going is to have a roadmap. So the goal is to just define, you know, what these assets are, where they are, and communicate them visually. By defining assets by system, and most importantly, we're aligning expectations. The first iteration, so if you see it says version 2, the first iteration was just, we said to the trades, our trade partners, that we're scanning, you know, stub ups, manholes, vaults, vertical bends, and we just described what we're scanning. Whereas on version 2, because of all the confusion as well, is this an asset or is this not? We decided to go through and spend a little more time and define it. Come up with a list, you know, highlight them all. We put them into a system where, you know, there was a lot less questioning of, is this an asset or is it not? The hard part is taking CAD out into the field can also be a challenge, because you're not connecting the virtual environment to the existing conditions. So to do that, to increase the communication, we used SkyCatch, drone deploy. You know, there are many out there. We happen to use SkyCatch on this one, but we took that crossings map, that asset map, and we overlaid it on the ground truth. This made it contextual. This made it easy to understand. The trades could go in, they could turn off all the layers except for theirs, and they could still see what we intended on scanning. And they can also see, well, based on yesterday's flight, I'm getting pretty close. And so they can start being aware of what's coming and start requesting scans, so that we're not trying to jump through hoops, you know, fight fires all day. I hate to say it, but I'm not a firefighter. I don't think I would go into a burning building if it were, you know, in front of me. But in this case, in construction, many times we are very reactionary. And so if we can get this plan communicated in a way that people can understand it, it allows us to be proactive and be ready for the scan when it should come. So with the amount of data that comes with laser scanning, consistency is key. Searchability is key. If you can't pull up a scan in minutes, and if it takes you hours to find that scan if someone asks for it, then you might as well not have it. The decisions in construction are made in real time and without having a complete picture. So if we can help close that gap a little bit by providing this information as quickly as possible, as accurately as possible, we can help paint a more complete picture so that the decisions being made are using the latest and greatest information. Because let's face it, if they don't have the information at the time they need to make the decision, they will still make the decision and we'll just have to deal with the consequences later. Indecision in construction can be more costly than an incorrect decision. So laser scanning, let's help close the gap. So reviewing scans. So after we go out and we scan the asset, how do we review it? You know, there are scans today even with the advent of AI, it still makes sense to just review them manually. A lot of our exterior scans, they are hyper-focused on what the asset is. It's not a bunch of different systems. It's usually one system that is about to be crossed by a future system, or it will tie in later to a future system. And so it's very specific. In this case, we don't use AI. We just take the point cloud into Navisworks and we do a quick review, document it, and move on. So not all scans today need AI. But the real challenge, as I mentioned before, with laser scanning is how do we balance capturing as much data as possible while still being able to review it without overwhelming the reviewer? I think this problem statement is where Avvir is really poised to help us solve that challenge.
So thanks, Tim. So hi, I'm Raffi, and I'm the CEO of a company called Avvir. We use reality capture data like laser scanning or photography, and we compare that reality capture data to your building information model to both quantify construction progress and evaluate construction quality. Now, Tim mentioned a roadmap, right? If you want to get where you're going, best to have a roadmap of what that plan looks like. And that's what the BIM is supposed to function as. But I haven't actually used a static map in over a decade, right? I pull out my phone and my map has GPS, right? The roadmap today has GPS so that you can close the loop and not just have the static information about what's in front of you, but also know where you are relative to that space. BIM was always meant to be that kind of roadmap. I actually came into construction through computer vision and working on computer vision and BIM. And I got acquainted with the history of BIM. And its inventors meant for it to be a digital twin of a building that would serve the building not just during the design phase, but during the construction and even the asset management phase of a building's life cycle as well. Historically, BIM never got there because, like any plan for a fast-changing reality, it became out of date very quickly, and BIM was difficult to keep up to date. You know, in the last 5 or so years, reality capture, particularly laser scanning, has made it possible to more directly compare your reality to your initial plan. But like Tim was just saying, if you engage in that, you'll still find it pretty overwhelming very quickly. You know, the amount of data and the number of decisions you need to make as to, you know, what's correct, what is, what's truly as built versus the design, where are things clashing, where are they not, and what matters. And so that was the primary problem that Avvir wanted to step in and solve. How can we take this, you know, waterfall of data that's coming at a VDC team or a project management team and take that workflow off of their plate? So Avvir ingests the reality capture data, it ingests the BIM, and then automatically does that comparison and analysis so that we can then turn over, hopefully an updated BIM, or at least a BIM that's highlighted with all of the issues, back to the VDC team and make their lives a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I think the real benefit to Avvir is how do we reduce the noise? There's stimulus all around us. And, you know, many times we make these mental shortcuts to help us deal with that. Avvir helps us to focus on the problem and allows us to spend time solving the problem instead of spending all of our valuable resources just simply finding the problem. Brings it to light, lets us focus on solving, not finding, reduces the noise. So bringing this back to how we're leveraging Avvir today in our workflow, I think we've been working with Raffi and team for probably close to a year now in conversations, and probably the last 6 months or so in production. And so we've seen a lot of improvement from when we just had this idea of, you know, how do we limit the amount of time we're spending to do these scans or to do these reviews, but still gaining all the value. Luckily, I don't know if the stars aligned or what happened, but Raffi reached out to me on LinkedIn, and that's how we got connected. And I'm really grateful that he did reach out, because it's been a blessing in that now we can spend time capturing, hopefully not in the future, but right now we're spending our time to capture. We then leverage Avvir to do the review for us. We then step back and then look at the findings. So interior scans, where the congestion is much greater and there are multiple trades in close proximity, that's where the opportunity to leverage Avvir or leverage AI is much greater. The ability to compare the scan by having the deviations glowing in red as I'm showing on my screen. Like I said, this allows us to spend time figuring out how bad is this problem, not where is the problem. So like I said, it allows us to spend our resources on solving, not finding the problem. One key benefit here is the ability to move a slider back and forth to kind of see where are these bigger problems. Move the slider and have the deviations glowing in red change based on how bad they're deviated. So for us on the job that I'm kind of showcasing here, we've got two levels of deviations. We have warning, which is a 1 inch that you're viewing right now, and then also critical, that's 3 inches. Meaning if it's if it's less than 1 inch out, then there's really not anything that we need to discuss. It's more of just take note of it. If there's anything getting close to 1 inch, then maybe take note of it, but we don't need to do anything about it necessarily. When we're between 1 and 3 inches, it needs to be a discussion. We need to start talking through it because we're getting closer to that critical level. The critical level is where we have to get the client involved. If there is a deviation that's greater than 3 inches, the client needs to weigh in to make sure that we're not just making a decision in a silo that may impact future builds that they may have in mind for retrofits. So we do have the ability in this platform to choose between 1 and 3 inches, or even 6, or down to 1/8. So it allows us to kind of tailor that message to the audience that it's going to. And this is where building control is paramount, because if we can't get our scans to align to the model within a 1/2 inch or even a 1/4 inch, which is survey grade, how can we feasibly say or truthfully say what is wrong? Is it the scan or is it the system? So if we can't guarantee that our scans are accurate to the actual position in the field, we start to lose the ability to say, is the system that was captured in the scan right or wrong? Honestly, the client on this project is pushing us to guarantee accuracy of our scans down to 1/8 of an inch or even a 1/16 if we can get there. In my opinion, that's not possible today. We work really hard with our control network. There's close to 600 control points in this building. It's a 500,000 square feet in total. So there's a lot of control in there, and we do our best to get our resection, the quality of our control network as tight as possible to the 1/16. But right now there's no way to verify that, or to guarantee and have someone be able to verify that our scan is as accurate to real world coordinates as we're claiming it to be. So there is a push for it, as many jobs are. The client's asking for us to kind of push things a little further to see if we can get a little tighter. But we just got to be careful about where we push back and for what reason. So bringing this back to the model, Avvir gives us the ability to export a deviations IFC. We can export the as-built IFC, but more focused is we can export the deviated elements into an IFC model. This allows us to bring it back into Navisworks or into your model viewing platform of choice. Us, it's Navisworks. And the real benefit to that is we can look at downstream impacts. We can say, well, if this piece deviated and the rest deviated, equally, does that cause any downstream impacts? Are there any concerns about proximity or other things that may not be shown in the model? And that's where the human brain, I think, really comes in. Today, computers are getting there. Maybe not on construction, though. Can they answer questions like that? So the ability to export that IFC and bring it back to the coordination platform allows us to not add one more platform, one more source of digital or technology fatigue, but instead bring it right back. One future thing that we're trying to look into is the ability to do under slab scans. Right now, as you can see in the picture, we've got a bowl of spaghetti, as I describe it, of conduit going everywhere inside this building. And right now we're trying to figure out, well, can we leverage AI to review this? Stub ups, absolutely. Horizontal runs, possibly, because we have to keep in mind that field bent conduit isn't going to be as perfect as modeled conduit. So we're still trying to dig into more of these types of scans to see where can we push the boundaries on what is possible today. At the end of this, finding these issues is only part of the problem. We also need to track them. If we're not tracking these issues to resolution, why are we even finding them? The follow through is what really makes the difference. On this job, we use BIM track because of its integration into Navisworks. So we can screenshot it, we can have a conversation about it, we can assign it to the party that needs to address it. If it is a field issue that needs to be corrected in the field, then they will add it to BIM 360 field because that's their platform of choice. And so the real goal here is to get the information in the platform that the audience is using. And then lastly, keeping score. So we have a saying that if you're not keeping score, then it's just practice. And we don't want to practice. We want to keep score. We want to get better. And so like I mentioned, if we can smell the smoke before there's fire, we can react to it. We can put out the fire before it's ablaze. And so as many people on the call are probably using Power BI, we use it for deviation detection or deviation analysis to say, are there hotspots in the building that are glowing red? If there are, like the interior one shown in red, do we need to get back, work with the design team to say, well, why is it a higher congested area? Can we use this data of where we're finding deviations? Maybe there are constructability issues. Maybe there are sequence issues. Can we bring that information to make the design better? And the only way to do that is to track and to keep score and make sure that we're all working in the same direction. I don't know who said it, but there's a saying out there that those who don't study history are bound to repeat it. There's nothing worse than repeating your mistake over and over and asking the client to pay for it over and over. So you may be asking, how long does it take us to go from scan to deviation report? Well, we've committed to our trade partners that we would do this within 24 hours. We can't ask them to slow down their production schedules to allow us to do this unnecessarily. So we've come to the agreement that if we can do it within 24 hours, we're slowing them down for a good cause, but if we go beyond that, we're unnecessarily slowing them down. The contractors do have the ability to say, we feel that we are correct, so we're going to proceed at risk and bury the system. We do say though, if it's being buried by concrete, you must wait for us to let you know whether or not we saw any concerning deviations. The goal in all of this and the real push behind the 24-hour turnaround, it goes back to that statement I made earlier about how do we decrease the number of decisions made where the person that is making the decision feels like they don't have a complete picture of the situation. This is just one more lens that we're looking at those problems from to try to have a better outcome. So now what's next for lasers or for reality capture? That we can capture more, review more. There's probably more use cases out there. We can do it faster with things like platforms like Avvir or like Spot or Sky Duo. Maybe we fly a drone inside to capture nightly on like kind of high base spaces where a laser scanner would either have to be elevated or we lose fidelity. And we want to do this for less. If we can track progress installation and not only say the mechanical system is installed 60%, but we can say, hey, of that 60%, 10% there are deviations at the warning level, 5% there are deviations at the critical level. So then it gives us a better idea as to what is actually billable, and we don't start to spend money faster than we should, or our burn is actually what it needs to be to sustain a healthy progress through the job. And we don't just work through all of our budget right at the beginning, and we think that we're done and we're actually not. So with things like Avvir or Sky Duo or Spot, I think we're all moving in the right direction. It's just now how do we tactfully do this to where we don't make false promises and we actually use the data to everyone's benefit. So with that, I have no idea if I'm on time or not. So hopefully I am. If there are a few minutes and there are questions, I'd like to open it up. If not, Dana, I defer to you on if we need to keep moving.
Awesome. No, it looks like there was a bit of conversation. So definitely got some people excited about this topic. I think Raj's question was answered. Is there a way to plug in automating scanning with a drone or something that captures automatically? And I think that you kind of covered that with what's next, right? Maybe setting up nightly scans and different things like that.
Yeah, the real kicker for that though is how do we do the registration piece? Because to my knowledge, there's nothing today that can take raw scan data that hasn't been registered to control. And so until Spot is able to recognize targets, or the software is able to recognize those targets and basically auto position it based on a known control network, there will be some human intervention needed to take that data, register it to control, provide it to the platform like Avvir to then analyze it. So hopefully Raffi's listening and he can help solve that problem for us in the future.
This is actually probably the number one problem our customers face today, or like the biggest ask we get from clients is, can we make the capture easier? And part of that is just having a robot to do the physical capture, but even more than that at this point, it's really, all right, I've got my laser scan, but now I've got to stitch the scans together and I've got to register it to the, in the right location. We are working on automating that, or at least a piece of that. So we already actually have an algorithm that we're testing now to auto register the scan to the BIM. And that's probably a couple months away from being deployed in our production environment and being available to clients. And a bunch of our scanning partners, including Boston Dynamics, and I know Leica's working on this, I know Trimble's working on this, GeoSlam, are all working on the ability to auto stitch the scans and pick up on, automatically pick up on registration points that are left in the field. So it should be, hopefully within the next 6 to 8 months, a much more seamless workflow. Right? The ideal would be you send the robot out, it automatically walks around, it comes back, it parks itself, it connects to Wi-Fi, uploads the scans to the right folders in the cloud, and they are auto-stitched, auto-registered, and you just get results back. So that workflow is coming.
We have a question. This sounds really awesome. And I know how hard that is to process. We also have a question related to this about geolocating your Revit model. Let's see here, it got clipped off for me. Using site control to ensure proper alignment.
Sure. So I'm trying not to get too into the weeds on control, but I do want to drive home the point that the control network is really what enables all of these things. That's what we build from. And so to connect the physical world with the virtual world, I don't know of, I mean, to my knowledge, Revit can't use state plane coordinates. It says that the coordinate is too far from the origin. And I think the error message is something like the lines may not be parallel.
20 miles within your
that's
coordinate.
The thing. State plane right now, the job I'm on is 11 million feet east, 3 million feet north, and that's Virginia state plane.
Goodness.
And so Revit can't handle that. And so we have to do this translation between project plane and state plane. The fictitious, the made up origin point in the Revit model at grid intersection A1, how do we translate that to real world coordinates? And so we do that through, we take AutoCAD, we bring in the civil coordinates, we bring in the architectural coordinates, we make a custom UCS that allows us to translate. And now at any point that we drop on that model, if we do it in state plane, it knows what it is in state plane. You change that UCS over to project plane, now you've got it in project plane. And that's a conversation that needs to be had by the right people at the very beginning of the job so that we all agree on what those translation points are, whether it's 2 points or it's 1 point in a rotation. If we're not all on the same page there, we will never be on the same page with control networks. And that's the real kicker for allowing us to align the virtual model to the real world coordinates, because outside the building, we build to state plane. Inside the building, we build to the fictitious project plane.
Right. Now, it looks like we're getting quite a bit of questions. And before we continue this conversation, I'd like to have our panelists join in onto the conversation, because I'm sure they have some wonderful answers as well. So I would like to welcome, as you saw earlier in the slide, Ian St. Hilaire. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Ian is a survey project manager with WSP. We also have Sean Lewis, a senior manager of reality capture for CODA, which is actually a Clark company. Clark affiliated company. So thank you, Ian and Sean, for joining us today. So let's see here. We did have a question. It looks like, Thomas, your question may have been answered about the frequency of scanning. Let's see here. Victoria has a question about, does anybody else have issues with drone reality capture being viable in their area? In DC, right, we can't do any type of drone scanning, things like that. We have to get special permissions. I worked at a project right next to the White House where they allowed it, but we had to go through all types of different, you know, permissions and red tape to get that. So if you guys, especially Raffi, maybe even Sean with CODA, I'm assuming that you guys do a lot of work in DC. How do you guys get around that?
There's restrictions, but there are certain things you have to do. The main things is, so it's the 7-mile radius of DCA airport. That's the heavily restricted one. We don't really mess with anything that's inside of that 7-mile radius. You have to have a federal representative with you to do that. Then there's the larger, I think it's 22-mile radius. That one's a little bit easier. You just have to get granted permission and go through some certain things. That one's not as bad, but 7-mile is pretty heavily restricted.
And Sean, since you're speaking, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do with CODA, how CODA utilizes this types of technology?
Yes, absolutely. So CODA does just about a little bit of everything. We're flying drones. We're using 360 cameras. We do a lot of laser scanning. Our laser scanning, we use it for, again, a little bit of everything, whether it's site logistics and how we know our site's going to end up working. We'll scan it beforehand. Progress tracking. We use it for, we do some modeling from point cloud data, so scan to BIM for some of our clients. So a little bit of everything is what I like to say that we do.
Awesome. Ian, you wanna jump in there with WSP?
Yes, with the survey background, geospatial coordination is key to any project success, especially when you're dealing with larger indoor-outdoor projects. I do a lot with the transportation and infrastructure, so we get a lot of major highway, tunnel, bridge work. And when you're on site, it's great to have a grid line, but when you're on such a large bridge site, you really need to rely on survey baselines and those accuracies in order to establish where you are in space. That way you guarantee where you're working is the proper space and you're installing in the right location.
Right, right. And you want to talk about a little bit about how you utilize reality capture and scanning within WSP?
I've been doing laser scanning for 10 to 15 years now and watched it advance from being where it was too much data for the computer to handle to now too much data for the end user to handle on their workstation. I like to see it revolutionized where it's auto extracted, where we see a lot more feature extraction from the point clouds to kind of lighten the load of the data set. Many times I have clients who say, yeah, we had it laser scanned, but no one can use the data. And that's unfortunate because it's such a good asset to work with. It just takes the proper people in the right set of hands to get what you need out of that data and how to utilize it effectively.
Absolutely. And of course, now with BIM 360 and other things, it's always a, how do we even visualize this? Where does it live? What do we want to do with it? How would you say, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and throw up a poll, or maybe just throw up a poll in addition to sharing. How is WSP, which is a huge engineering firm, we're working with them at SmithGroup, how do you guys utilize reality capture? What do you use it for? Clash coordination and a bunch of things, primarily?
Really throughout the project lifecycle, from pre-demolition, we'll do laser scanning. For our site work, we'll pull out the traditional aerial survey, later supplement that with drones and on-the-ground survey, all the way through the demolition phase to where we're laying out stockpile areas. Then through the construction and coordination phase, we're laying out in 3D where MEP elements are going, structural elements are to be placed, helping the on-site people not pull tape anymore, especially when you're dealing with complex environments. It's gone way past pulling out your tape measure and trying to figure out with the plumb bob where you go. Whereas with survey, you can lay out in 3D certain runs, utilize that information in the field.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. And Sean, how would you say that you at CODA, your teams are kind of pushing the boundaries with this types of technology, obviously being in the construction side of things?
We do a lot of analysis is kind of where we kind of do it, as CODA is short for construction data. So we take our point cloud data and we try to do a lot of analysis. Probably the heavy side is deviational analysis, where things are where they were supposed to be. And then also just collecting that data to use down the road. So Coda is a Clark Construction affiliate. Clark builds a lot of buildings. If we can harness everything that we've collected to use down the road for future projects, it's going to help Clark be a better builder and help our clients up front at the beginning stage. So we're doing a lot of things to hold that data so then we can have it for future projects. So projects start off on the right foot. That's where we're kind of pushing it a little bit.
Awesome. And Raffi, you probably see quite a bit of things being in your situation, in your seat. How are you seeing groups using this type of technology, or are you kind of seeing along the lines of what Tim is doing?
Yeah, so it's definitely very varied. You know, a lot of people are using it. I think the most common still use for reality capture today, and that was reflected in the poll we just did, is for some kind of scan to BIM, right? Either, or typically at the beginning of a project, people are scanning the existing conditions so that they can create a BIM model from that. And that's typically where it stops. More and more our clients, though, are also using our system to do deviation tracking over the course of construction. And one of the nice things about our system is that you can actually, with the click of a button, update the BIM based on the analysis of the scan. So it's not this call to your architect, them having to move something, or the call to the sub, and then having to move something and call you back. It's just one and done. And then also for progress tracking. So, you know, Tim was talking about keeping score. This is a way to kind of keep score with everybody, make sure everybody's actually on schedule, right? If you have a really tight ability to quantify and track progress for each vendor that you're using, it gives a much deeper sense of control to either the GC, the owner, or both when they're implementing a project.
It actually looks like Raj has another question. Keep them coming, Raj, we love it. Does Avvir decipher ductwork by system or piping by system?
So that's a really good question. The algorithm itself isn't really doing that. We rely on the BIM to have those systems broken out for us. And then what the algorithm is really doing is it's matching the elements in the point cloud to the elements in the BIM. So it knows that this ductwork is connected to a system, right? It knows which pieces of ductwork are connected to each other. And then if it can match that set of objects with a set of objects that carries certain information in the BIM, right? It's labeled, that system is labeled with, you know, cold water pipe in the BIM, then it can associate that information with that piece of the scan. In a vacuum, right? If we didn't have the BIM to compare to, we wouldn't necessarily be able to say, oh, that ductwork is, you know, the return, and that ductwork is sending out the air. But by having that BIM to compare to and having that BIM properly labeled, we can do a lot of interesting stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. That is fantastic. I know that would save so much time and coordination, just being able to know what it is you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just huge amount of time. So I kind of want to go around, and Raffi, since we're talking to you, where do you see the industry going in terms of how just the way we work? It's obviously changed quite a bit in terms of, especially working remotely, we're able to see a lot of things just virtually that we wouldn't be able to see, you know, because we can't even go to site sometimes. So how are you seeing maybe where this goes tomorrow or next year or 5 years?
Yeah, so I actually think this is, you know, the COVID crisis is speeding us toward a new normal in construction. I think, you know, we were headed there eventually anyway, basically toward increased automation and a more remote project team regardless. And I think this is necessitating it. You know, obviously, I don't think anybody wants to not be able to go to site. You want to be able to do what you want to do. But there are a lot of times where a project management team doesn't necessarily want to have to be on site. Or if you're a general contractor and you've got one amazing superintendent, you want him to be able to serve multiple projects at once. And with the reality capture ecosystem exploding as it is due to this crisis, I actually think things like that will be possible and just normal going forward. I think that's the new normal we're going to return to, is a situation where you can visit the site whenever you want, but you don't have to as often as you used to. There'll be increased automation in terms of just monitoring the site from a management perspective. And I think unrelated to that, I think you're also going to see an increase in robotics, and in terms of just labor replacement. That's already happening as well.
One of the things, and feel free, Raffi or whomever, one of the things that really intrigues me is facilities management. And I mean, obviously we've been trying to get our facilities manager to just use the BIM and to make that move for a long time. But I can see a huge benefit for a facilities manager to, if there's a leak, to be able to look at a three-dimensional model and say, the pipe from upstairs is running right back there. That's probably it, right? I mean, I can see so much.
That was the first story we would tell investors when we were doing our initial raise. It was actually two stories that actually happened to friends of mine who were involved in facility management. One was actually a leak that happened at a building at the Carnegie Mellon University campus, which is where I kind of came up with the idea for this company. A leak that should have been a leak that was solved in a couple of minutes and only cost a couple $100s to resolve. But because they couldn't, the facility manager went to the utility closet where the shutoff valve was supposed to be, and it wasn't there, and it took another 5 hours to identify where that shutoff valve actually was. That $500 leak turned into a $50,000 leak.
Oh my goodness. Just because they were digging everything up and trying to find it behind the walls?
They couldn't find it. We had a friend of mine was doing a renovation at a hospital in California. This was just an amazing story. I think it made the news, actually. They started sawing through a wall in the hospital, and it was only a wing of the hospital that was shut down for renovation. The rest of the hospital was operating. So they start sawing through what they assumed was, or what they believed was, a blank wall based on the existing plans.
And like the oxygen pipe was back there.
They go through the oxygen pipe.
Oh my goodness.
And thank God it's, plastic tubing, so no sparks, which would have been a huge disaster. But there's somebody in an operating room who is now without oxygen. So, alarms start going off. It gets crazy. There was actually a life and death situation at play. So
absolutely.
We definitely see the need for this in facility management. I think facility managers are starting to catch on as well. We have an eye to eventually move into that space and serve that space as well as the construction space. We see, the building life cycle is one holistic thing that, where a system like ours should be able to serve the building from construction through demolition. But we decided to start with construction problems rather than facility management problems, because the issue that all facility management digital twin solutions have today is that they're going off of a BIM that isn't necessarily the as-built version of the building. And then your digital twin isn't as useful as it could be.
It's a twin.
Yeah, it's not really a twin.
It's not a twin.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that really compounds that then is if the model's not accurate, then we're starting off on the wrong foot. And the other piece of that is, from what I've seen is we always say, well, here's a Navisworks model. Why aren't you using it? It's fantastic. Just use it. And the facility manager's like, I can't use that model. I'm in this platform. And it's this fighting of platforms where it's, hey, we've got this model. Why don't you use it? Well, I can't use that model. I need it in this format, or I need it in that format. Kobe starts getting thrown around. And so there's that opposing, well, we want to do what we need to do that's easy, convenient, and serves our needs. And we want to force you to use what we give you versus trying to marry those two up from the start.
And I'll just add on to that. When we got into the space, I mentioned that our biggest problem, the biggest ask from customers today is around automating the reality capture workflow. But when we first started, the biggest technical hurdle we had was exactly that, the interoperability problem of BIM. And Navisworks is a particularly powerful offender when it comes to that. It's very hard to make that work. Autodesk has kind of recognized that. They're working on fixing it, but it's a slow-moving beast. So we had to take it on ourselves to make sure everything worked together so that you could bring a Tekla model, a Revit model, a Smart Plant model all into one system.
And not just get an IFC export that dumbs it down completely.
Exactly, so you can bring it back. Yeah.
Awesome. Sean, I assume that you probably work quite a bit, especially in the handoff process to the facilities management team. Are you seeing any interest from them, or where would you see the future of this? I guess it's kind of a two-part question. Where would you see the future of reality capture and scanning going from Coda's perspective, I guess?
All right, so I feel like there's kind of like a two-part question there. One on the future of kind of reality capture, and then one on how it relates to the facilities management side. In regards to the future of reality capture, I think probably the most used tool is going to end up being your phone. I think there's going to be different ways you're just taking photos. Sensors in the camera sensors and phones are just going to keep on getting better and better and better. And that's going to make the photogrammetry work that much better. And I think that's going to be used a lot to stitch together certain areas. And construction, a lot of times they just want to know something about this one area right now. So if they can go out there, take a whole bunch of photos with their phone, maybe there's some type of targeting up, whatever. We're talking future stuff, so I don't know what all the answers are. And that just goes pop right into a model, and then they can see all those different issues. That's what they're going to want. They need those answers right now. So that's where I think one of the real kind of practical thing that could be the future of reality capture. Now, how it relates to the facilities management side is that digital twin thing that everyone talks about now is going to just become a reality. I mean, everyone is talking about it. The models are going to become much more of a living thing, and people are going to actually start updating them per things like the software that Tim and Raffi were showing with Avvir. Those type of things are going to happen where the model actually gets updated throughout the entire thing, and you're going to end up with that final as-built model that then gets brought out as just really an asset. And then every little thing, every asset inside of there is going to be smart. It's just not going to be a dumb valve that you can't find buried behind a wall. It's going to be a water valve that holds this much flow. If that flow reduces down to this much, it's going to send off an alarm. Facility manager knows where it is, and he can actually hopefully find it. I mean, that's where it's going to go, hopefully.
I think one of the things that really plays into these conversations is using the right piece of technology for the task at hand. And so I know with COVID, virtual is now this new norm that we're all forced into. And how do you do a punch walk virtually? We can't fly our design team from California, from Boston, from New York to our job site to do this punch walk. And so using things like Matterport, it's close to a laser scanner in fidelity, but it's closer to the speed of 360 photos in capture speed. And so using the right technology to get the right fidelity to answer the questions that are being asked is going to be the new norm. We may, hopefully on this job, we stop flying the design team all around the country to answer these questions that we can answer with AR. We can capture it, discuss it, they can walk it. Facility now has a replica with really high res photos. They can zoom, they can measure. They don't have to go out there to figure out what the potential problem is. They can see the alarm, look at that spot in the virtual world, get a game plan, grab the right tools, go out and solve the problem the first time. So a lot of this comes down to not getting hung up on grabbing the convenient solution, and it's more, or the flashy solution. It's more stepping back and saying, what is the definition of success? What are those things that could make or break the outcome of this effort, and deciding the right piece of technology to solve those needs. COVID's just forcing us to think through that in real time.
Definitely pushing us forward in that. And like you said, I mean, it's also giving us a leverage of finding projects that aren't necessarily local, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a huge benefit for, some people who aren't able to get work as easily. So actually, we're going to bring in Thomas. Thomas has a few questions for the panel. Hopefully we can get him in. Nick Seiss is going to bring Thomas Bayless in. Can you hear us, Thomas?
Yes. Am I unmuted? I guess
you are.
We can hear you.
There was a reference to using proper label formats to have the scan match up to the BIM model.
Yep.
By proper format, is it meant Revit default labels? Or I'm not a Revit modeler, by the way. I manage people. I try and learn a little bit, so maybe it's a silly question.
No, and not a silly question at all. So what I was mentioning is, in order for our system to know, or for our algorithm to know what system a particular object is part of, that information needs to be in the BIM. There are such things as proper labeling. I mean, there are labeling systems out there, but we don't necessarily care which you use, as long as you use a system. And then we can make sure that, if that information is there, right, so that we know this piece of ductwork corresponds to your air handler system, then our system can track, right, the percentage complete for the air handler system. It just needs to be consistent throughout the BIM. You don't necessarily need to use one system versus another. Does that make sense? And Thomas, you're muted.
Yes. I just
I do
chatted.
that all the
Yes,
time.
thank you. That's all I need. Thanks.
Fantastic. Do you have any other questions? Andrew, thank you for being a part of the conversation. So one thing that I will ask everybody, and maybe Raffi, we'll start with you. It seems like a lot of people don't use this type of technology, and I can totally understand. I mean, we work with SmithGroup. We're a big company. We have our own laser scanners. But for a smaller company or a company who doesn't have their own types of in-house, scanners or that type of software, what have you, what would you say? How could you tell people what's the easy way to start to utilize this with your phone? I know there's a reality capture app.
So I was going to say, in response, I think what Sean was talking about, the future is our phone. So I didn't start this company until 2017, even though I had the idea 6 years earlier. And the reason for that is mobile scanning really came to market around that time, which has put downward pressure on the price point for scanning. So scanning is becoming much more affordable even for smaller companies and smaller jobs. The second thing is, you now have the new iPhones that are going to be hopefully coming out in a couple of months will have LiDAR built into them. The new iPads that are available now already do. There are certain limitations to that LiDAR system, primarily the range. So you've got a 15-foot range, which is not enormous, obviously. But the quality is actually pretty decent, and I expect the range will get better. I expect hardware systems will come out that are, take advantage of those LiDAR on a chip that's available today that Apple's taking advantage of. That'll bring the cost of LiDAR down further and make it available to everyone. So I think there are price points at which people can get involved now, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, so it's about a third of the users, as we saw in the poll, aren't using reality capture, at least part of this discussion. So hopefully that will make it a little easier. Anybody else? Tim, Ian, Sean, you guys have any feedback?
So my rhetorical question back to the group would be, is it more expensive to do it, or is it more expensive not to do it? And the reason, it's easy to answer that once you've prevented a problem that costs a lot of money. But before you have, it is quite the investment. Some of these scanners that we've got on these job sites are upwards of $100,000. Now, hopefully you never realize that that savings because you prevent all the problems because of your construction methodology. But to assume that that's going to be the case, it's kind of that iceberg analogy of, when someone gets hurt, the upfront cost of them, getting them to the doctor and, stitching them up, that's far and beyond the cheaper end of that spectrum. And so, like, I see some of my coworkers on this call, and so I'm gonna pull from one of the lessons learned that they shared that really solidified this use case for the client that we're both working for, in that they were doing these stub ups, 4-inch stub ups in the data hall and of this massive facility, like 500,000 square feet per building. And through the scanning, they realized that the stub ups were 4 feet off. Unfortunately, the person that did the layout came off the wrong column line, I think is the root cause, which is completely understandable. They pulled from the column line, they pulled 4 feet, or pulled whatever the dimension that it was supposed to be. They spray painted a little dot to say, here's where the rack is supposed to sit. Now through scanning, we caught that before the slab was poured. If we hadn't caught that, it would have been easily $100,000 mistake. So right there is the cost of the scanner. So now hopefully it's not one of those things where it's like, wow, since we paid this $100, we prevented this $100,000. But that's my question back to the group, is to think through, what is that, if you could think of one big mess up where you're like, man, that was really expensive fix. Ask yourself, could it have been prevented with reality capture? If it is, if the answer is yes, or it could be yes, then you gotta ask yourself, do I want to spend money to prevent the problem, or do I want to spend potentially more money to fix the problem?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, the ROI on that you're already getting your investment back, just that first project, right?
Yeah,
John,
and ROI is a little difficult to, I don't like the term ROI, because if you say I've prevented this door from being installed wrong, it saved me $100, and there's 15,000 doors, then it's $15,000 that I saved. ROI can be a slippery slope, but when you've got those hard examples of installing the conduit wrong, we installed one of the first vaults for our telecom, which is the lifeblood of a data center. We installed it at the wrong elevation, and no one caught it with a grade rod. So there's those things that inevitably happen. We make mistakes, we're human, and if we can prevent those from becoming larger problems after it's too late to fix them, that's really where we're saving money.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, on the cost saving side of things, calculating the ROI for catching errors can be tricky, because hopefully you don't always have major errors in every project. And even if you do, if you catch something, you can't always calculate how much you saved, because maybe your super would have caught it tomorrow. It's hard to say for sure. But we had one issue we caught on another data center, not being built by Tim, where it was definitely a 7-figure savings. The whole, the whole steel system was off. It had settled by some crazy amount, over a foot of settling, that nobody noticed and nobody caught, and they could have built for months before it really causing issues. And the reason they caught it was because the owner required regular laser scanning.
I want to jump to Raj. Raj has been a wonderful part of this discussion. Thank you so much for your questions. Can you hear us, Raj? Are you live with us?
I can. Can you hear me? Good.
I can.
Okay. So I'm a mechanical engineer, and so most of my questions are bent from picking up the asset data as far as piping systems, and then just how, so if you say a hot water pipe should have been a cold water pipe, as a simple example, there isn't any way to kind of pick that up right now.
Depends what you mean by that. You can actually sometimes pick up that a hot water pipe was, if they got switched, right? The way we pick up the systems is, if in the BIM you have the cold water pipe, and in the BIM you've got the hot water pipe, and then you've got objects within the scan that roughly match those positions, or match those layouts, and particularly the origin points, right? Because pipes and HVAC move like crazy from their initial plans, but the points at which they pass through concrete or any other kind of structural system tend to be pretty static.
So it'll all be just dumb XYZ type coordinate. You wouldn't be able to pick up like an expansion joint telling me that it's a hot water pipe, or I've got a chilled water pipe insulation of 2 inches. Those kind of things, could you build in, or?
You can. So what we can't tell you is whether, if you run cold water through your hot water pipe, let's say you laid everything correctly, but you just decided to, at the very end where you're not scanning, you decided to flip the arrangement. We couldn't tell you that.
Right, and I'm more geared towards probably like a mechanical room, applying AI in a mechanical room where you've got the spaghetti, as you mentioned, and making sure all the systems are piped.
So the way we track those systems is, again, we understand that anything that is pipe-like, whether it's piping itself or ductwork, is going to deviate, or can deviate pretty wildly from the way it's planned in the BIM. But the points at which it passes through structural elements tend to deviate in just very predictable ways. And so if we can match up those origin and exit points, on the scan and the BIM, we can say, okay, this piece of pipe, even though it may have deviated wildly from its plan, is in fact the same cold water pipe that is present in the BIM.
All right, last question. I appreciate all your time. And this is kind of the group just, so if we are moving towards that singular black box digital twin, the architects, engineers draw it in Revit, then it's turned over to multiple construction. So should we all kind of just keep it to Revit products, or is there something that turns over to facilities at the end where that, because they're going to want it to tie into their work order system, their CMMSs, and so that's the part that's very difficult.
Yeah, I'll let the rest of the team speak to this as well, but we would love if everybody did everything in Revit. We haven't seen that happen. Most of our facility management clients do want everything back in Revit, and what we've actually started working on is helping people get, a Navisworks model that has origins in various systems into, translate that into a Revit model easily. Haven't completed that piece of work yet, but we are working on it.
Yeah, I know the client for the project that I'm on, they're trying their best to mandate that everything, all the modeling is done in Revit to just ensure that we have a common starting point and a common ending point. A lot of these things that, that impact our industry are usually forced along by clients. If they ask us to do something, we're more likely to do it. Now, it could be, as Raffi's saying, it starts in SprintCAD or it starts in something else, and we're then translating it to a Revit model, which isn't Revit native. And so we probably will lose some fidelity, some accuracy, some smarts of that model of knowing what is an endpoint, what is a connection point, what is a valve, etc. And it just becomes geometry for the short term. But I do know that I don't think we'll ever get to a point where the entire industry, nor should we get to a point where the entire industry is using Autodesk. That's just way too much power to give to one company that loves to buy up other companies. So I don't think we should ever force that. But if the clients are asking us to start and end in Revit, I mean, let's face it, they're paying the bill. So we're either going to start and end in Revit, or we're going to find a way to get there.
Well, I appreciate everybody's time. We went over a little bit today, it's 2:07. So thank you, and thank you for your time today. Thank you for everyone who participated in the conversation, and especially thank you to the panelists. Congratulations, Andrew Watkins and Chewbacca won the virtual background contest for today. So thank you so much for sharing your screen with us, Andrew, and of course for letting Chewbacca in the meeting. That's so important. He knows about BIM now. Well, thank you guys, engaged. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if the panelists could stay on, I would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, if you're a speaker or panelist, please remain on. We're going to have a post-meeting wrap-up. Okay, I think we're almost down to the panelists and the speakers. Just one more minute here. All right. Nick and I are moving people. Okay, super. So,
So I have a confession.
thank you.
I'm actually at my mom's house, which is why I was having internet problems, because they're pile driving next to my house.
Oh no.
So it's actually, I live on 3rd and M. I don't know whether Coda, you guys have been over there, but it's the armature works right there. But they just started, in addition to the armature works, directly across the street. They're pile driving there now. So it's like, I can't.
That would have been a great metronome. Just ping,
Right.
ping, ping. I mean, we would have been on time then.
So also I don't have my second screen. So when I was presenting and I'm like, shit, I don't have my script, which is why
What?
there was like that 2 minutes of dead air at the beginning, because I had to like pull up my phone and like have it right here. Like Murphy's Law over here.
All right. Well, I just don't want to take too much of anybody's time, but just wanted a quick debrief on the call on what we could do better, really. And Tim and Raffi, from your point of view, I mean, I thank you so much for your time. I thought you were obviously a big part of the conversation and kind of steered it well. But how could it have gone better from your end? What could we have done better to make it easier for what you guys are doing so that we can make this more valuable the next time we do it? That's really what we're looking for. You got any comments or any ideas on things that went well, didn't go so well, how we could make this better?
I think us chiming in worked fairly well. I tried to do the head nod to get called on, but I didn't want to raise my hand like we had talked about. But I thought the chiming in was pretty good. I do think, I apologize, I probably talked more than I should have, but letting the other people talk. Sometimes I struggle because I have an opinion on everything.
I have
so
the same
sometimes
issue.
I had to bite my tongue.
I think we're all relatively in that boat.
Yeah.
No, but John, I thought you did a great job of steering.
Sorry to interrupt. Do we want to stop the recording?
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead, stop recording. Thank you.
Okay.
Well,
keep
now
going.
that I'm on record.
All right, thank you. So I think what I heard, Tim, is to